What's going on, everybody? Welcome back. My name is Ryan, and today we are going to be talking about this beautiful piece of hardware. This is the brand new Samsung Galaxy Z Fold3. So this phone was officially launched on August 27th of 2021. I have been using it at this point for roughly about 6-7 days now. This is my own personal device. I opted in, I decided to buy my very first foldable. I'm pretty pumped about it, coming off of an iPhone going to something like this. So the bonus is that because I was able to get mine early, I'm actually going to be able to give you an in-depth review on how I feel about this phone so early into its lifespan. So let's talk about it. All right, so I'm going to flash the internal specs up on the screen here for you in just 2 seconds. But the first thing that I want to talk about in terms of the new Samsung Galaxy Z Fold3 5G would in fact be the build quality of this device. It's probably going to be the first thing that you notice, especially if you've ever held or used a foldable previously. This device has Gorilla Glass Victus front and back. The back of it has a matte finish to it, which really cuts down on the fingerprints. I'm not even sure if you can really even see any in the light here, but the gloss on the Fold 2, you'll be able to see it really well actually in the previous video that I've made for that review. I'll card it up here in the top, but the matte finish really alleviates a lot of the fingerprints. Doesn't get rid of them altogether, but it makes this thing considerably less of a fingerprint magnet than the previous device was. And then on top of that, they have a new armor aluminum around the outside of the device, which again is matte in texture. And I mean, you don't really have the channels that I was able to show you on the Fold 2 running along. So with the previous device, you had these little channels that kind of went around the frame. You don't have that anymore. It's just flat, smooth edges, but it feels really good. In terms of the hinge of the device, you'll still get the Samsung inlaid in there, but the motion of it, just opening and closing it, feels far more rigid and stiff and stable than it did on previous Fold units. If you recall on the Fold 1, which unfortunately my channel wasn't around at that point in time, you could open the phone up and literally wiggle it, and the two halves will just flap back and forth. You don't have that with this phone. This can sit at virtually any degree and sit there. For your external display, you do get a 6.2-inch 2x AMOLED display with a 120 Hz refresh rate, and you get a 10 megapixel selfie camera up in the top there. Now this phone, I tend to use this screen a little bit more than I would the inner screen, which we'll talk about here in a second. But to be honest, I'm really happy that they were able to bring 120 Hz refresh to this display as opposed to, I believe it was the 60 Hz on the previous device. In terms of your inner display, you do get a 7.6-inch, again, 2x AMOLED 120 Hz display. It is quoted at being 80% more durable than the previous one. With that said, though, it is still only rated for 200,000 folds. Now, if we were to do the math on that, that is 100 folds per day for 5 years. I don't know anybody that's going to keep this phone for 5 years, but that still makes me far more confident in what this screen is capable of enduring. Now, it's going to be hard to see on this camera right here, but there is a under display camera, and I'm going to show you just in a B-roll shot that there are some pixels that do in fact cover that camera. Now, some people complain about these pixels and say that it's a little bit distracting, but in all fairness, in my opinion, when you're using this device for any type of media consumption or scrolling or really anything of the sort, those pixels just kind of disappear into your peripheral vision. You don't really see them, and it's not that big of a deal. That's really all there is to it. In terms of taking photos with that camera, though, it's not necessarily something that I would recommend. That camera in particular is only 4 megapixels. So what that means is that you get something that's kind of like BlackBerry Curve or Bold era. Let's say like the early to mid 2010s. It's definitely not great quality. It's not awful. It's definitely adequate for a video call, but it's not necessarily something that you'll want to put on your Tinder page. I mean, unless you're trying to catfish and that you don't really want anybody to know what you really look like. I mean, I'm being kind of dramatic here, but let's just move on. Now, a question that's already been asked to me a whole bunch just by people seeing me with this device out in the open, because where I live, this sort of tech definitely isn't mainstream. How bad is that crease? Now, there's 2 answers to this. One is that it is definitely there. It is absolutely visible. But the other side of it is that Samsung did great work in making this crease damn near invisible when you were staring straight at the display. However, if you're looking at an angle, in any way, you are going to notice it. But most instances when you are consuming media on that large display, you're probably going to be looking right at it as opposed to from an angle. So again, similar to the under display camera, is it that big of a deal? Not really. Let's talk about the dream team of the Snapdragon 888 and the 12 gigs of RAM inside of this phone. This thing is a damn powerhouse. It flies through any and all tasks that you are going to throw at it. Have I had any issues with apps opening slowly or slowing down when you're in them, locking up, restarting, if anything getting lost in RAM management? Not once have I had an issue with this. Everything loads on this phone so fast. It almost doesn't feel like, I mean, I'm going to probably get chastised for saying this. It doesn't even feel like an Android phone. Some Android phones are really notorious for kind of hitting those lockups and those stalls at some point or another, and I have had a lot running on this phone at any given time, and you can absolutely tell that it has been designed for productivity. It is an absolute powerhouse. I haven't gone too in depth in terms of multi-window and having multiple tasks running simultaneously on the screen. I have had a few things going here and there. Most notably have been things like YouTube, Twitter, and Notes all open at the same time. But I even still, like, the phone was like, I'm good, let's keep going. And then in the same conversation, one may ask, well, how do you find battery life, especially on a device that is so designed for productivity? And I will say that it's not terrible. It's not great, but it's not terrible. If you've been following me for a while, or even just from the start, you understand that I consider myself a power user, and I am on my phone a lot, and that battery life is very important to me because of that. Great, fast charging is a thing, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I want to be tethered to a wall or even a wireless charger. So having a battery that is going to be able to maintain itself for a respectful amount of time is something that is very important to me. And I will say that this phone is capable of doing that. So I'm going to give you a snapshot of what my day looks like, and it'll kind of give you an idea on how the battery might hold up for yourself. So I get up 5:30 a.m. for the gym. My phone does come with me, and I'm listening to music for that entire hour. And then I will go to work. I'll use it for productivity there. I'll come home. I'll use it for leisure. And then I'll go to bed roughly around 9 o'clock at night, at which point my phone gets plugged back in. At that point in the day, I still have in the neighborhood of 20% of battery life. Now, considering that I have left 5G on, as well as the adaptive 120 Hz refresh rate, I consider that fairly decent. And it's my understanding that that's really only going to improve because I believe it was with the S20 lineup, Samsung implemented an adaptive battery AI that learns the patterns of how you use your device, and it's going to put apps, services, and all of that stuff to sleep in the background that you have shown not to use. So that process in itself, I believe, takes 10 to 15 days, so I'll report back, but I'm really only expecting the battery life on this thing to improve. All right, so I've had a lot of positive things to say up to this point. So you might be sitting there and be like, Ryan, what's wrong with this phone? Well, there's really only two things that I can think of, and one of them isn't even Samsung's fault. So let's talk about the one that is. This phone is slippery. Very similar to the Flip 3 5G, which I'm going to be reviewing in a couple of weeks. I'm just waiting for my custom build model to come in, and I'm not even necessarily sure that that's really like anything that Samsung could have done other than use other materials. It's just that this device, if it's put on a surface that is not even, if it's on an angle of any sort, this phone is going to go on an adventure on its own. I know that typically if you get matte frosted glass of any type, it has a certain slickness to it, and that could have something to do with the blame on it, but I mean, it is what it is. You kind of take the good with the bad in this instance because I do really like how this phone feels in the hand. So if that's the sort of trade-off, then cool, I'm just not going to put it on an angled surface. Now, the second issue, which really isn't necessarily Samsung's fault at all, is that if you are somebody that likes to put a case on your phone, and that's not me, you are going to have a hell of a time finding something that is half decent for this device. The problem with the Fold 3, or really any of the foldable devices, is that these are thick boys. These are quite chunky, and if you were to get any type of case for this device, it seems like all of the manufacturers got together and thought to themselves, we're going to create something that's going to add a lot of mass to your phone. So this thing essentially becomes twice the size if you were to put any of the current in-market cases on it, which I know that that's a trade-off for protection, but myself, if I were to put a case on a device, and sometimes I do want to, I would want something a little bit more sleek and slender in an effort to maintain the design of this device and not turn it into an absolute brick that you could build your house with. Now, if you've been following me for a while, you know that I tend not to put a case on my phones. Just a personal preference. However, there are certain circumstances in which I would really love to have just like an ultra slim case on this to protect against itty bitty bumps. And there are a few companies out there that do make really slim cases. And if you're watching this and you're one of them, you know who you are. Start making something for other than iPhone. That would be fantastic. Phones like this could really benefit from the type of product that you release. But yeah, those were the two biggest issues, and one of them isn't necessarily Samsung's fault. There's kind of a 0.5 of an issue, and it's something that I have really only found for myself. I mean, you may not necessarily have the same issues, but typing on that cover screen, that keyboard are real tiny. I definitely don't have massive hands by any means, but even my little thumbs, like it's just kind of difficult. I do find that I make a lot of typos. Now it brings me to kind of a workaround that you can utilize for something like that, and I intend on doing a full video on what you should do when setting up your Z Fold 3 to get the most out of it, so make sure that you're staying tuned for that. But enable swipe typing for the Samsung keyboard. You're going to find that if you prefer to use the cover screen, you are going to get far more accurate text messages and just really any type of text input if you're doing swipe on that as opposed to typing, especially if you've got thumbs like mine. That pretty much rounds up my primary thoughts on this device. Now, I do understand that I didn't hit on everything that this phone is capable of doing because it's just an absolute laundry list of tasks. So if there's a particular question that you have about it, feel free to let me know in the comments and I will answer you to the best of my abilities. Scout's honor, or whatever. I never actually joined the Scouts, so does that still count? I don't think that it does, but yeah, you get my point. So as I mentioned, I am going to be creating and uploading a video on what you should do to set up your new Z Fold 3 5G to get the absolute most out of it. So keep your eye open for that. And then my Flip 3 5G video is going to be released in a couple of weeks. I special ordered the white one, so that takes like 6 weeks for them to get it to you. I've seen a lot of all of the other colors out there, but I really wanted to get my hands on one that not a lot of people are going to have. So again, keep your eye open for that, because similar thing, after I give you my review on it, I'm going to be giving you a setup tutorial video. Anyway, that's it. That's all I got for you. If you liked this video, do me a favor, hit that thumbs up. And if you like this kind of content, please consider subscribing so that you can help me build this channel into something huge. You take care, and I'll see you in the next one.